I came in with hard mode. My textbooks didn't work, which is another reason why I had to create my own resource. Like, this book
Wow.
says this sentence, but you're not asking me this sentence. What are you saying? I had to do that because Daegu is not, it's built different. It's not meant for beginners.
I'm really excited to hear your experience teaching and as well to hear a lot about how you have been learning Korean in Korea. But first, let's start a little bit about yourself. What is your name and where are you from?
Awesome. Hi, it's awesome to be here. My name is Tiara or Tiara Youngblood, and I'm from New Jersey, USA.
New Jersey. Excellent.
Yeah,
And what is your native language?
my native language is English.
Did you grow up with
Mhm.
any other languages in your home?
My hometown in Orange, New Jersey, had a lot of speakers from either Mexico or Puerto Rico. So I grew up with Spanish even more than just in the classroom. And I used it a lot because I thought Spanish was so cool. And being able to say the same word in two different languages, I don't know, it just from a young age, I felt like I just cracked a code. And so I grew up with Spanish in my hometown before I moved. And then I studied languages in college. So Latin and ancient Greek, linguistics, Italian, and studying to be an English teacher. So I did secondary language education in college as well and taught adults for how to stand up for their workers' rights or even how to answer phone calls for school or for hospitals or understanding bills. It was a passion of mine, and here I am in Korea.
So let's back up a little bit to this college
Real.
experience here. That was a lot of languages that you just listed off. So were all those languages required to take?
I chose them. I was a
Okay.
little crazy. In high school, I went to a Catholic high school that no longer exists, but Mary Lawn of the Oranges. And my religion teacher, he had like a Greek and Latin poster. And when I saw the Greek letters for the first time, my heart was just like, I have to learn this. And I'm a Christian, I'm not a Catholic, but I thought it was so cool to know that some of the Bible was written in ancient Greek or even partly in Latin or Hebrew or Arabic. And so to be able to start that journey was really awesome. So I took them as self courses or like I self-taught from some books from my religion teacher, and he would quiz me on some stuff every weekend. I felt like a nerd studying for extra homework when no one else asked me to do this. It was just purely me and these old books from like 1990, I want to say, because my religion teacher was at least 70 years old. Bless his heart. He was excited to be able to pull these books out and give them to me. And I was like, this is so cool to translate the New Testament. And I finished the book, and he was like, great, now we're going to do Latin. So I did it a little backwards. And by the time I got into college, I wanted to take a new language. I was like, I don't want to do Latin and ancient Greek, but at the same time, I don't want to do Spanish because I feel like this is an opportunity to do a new language before I go back to my roots. So I chose Italian, and my Italian teacher was like, have you heard of my awesome friend? He's teaching Latin, and it would be nice if you could. And I was like, perfect. Say the word and I'll do it. Um, I went into school as a math major because I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I just didn't know for what. But in the end, I was taking calculus, Italian, Latin, and a teaching course. And what was the fifth class? I think it was like a class we all had to take, like a writing course or something. So most of my classes were related to languages. And after the first semester, I was like, I'm going to switch to languages. From
Wow.
there, my Latin teacher was like, you should take ancient Greek. And I was like, little did you know, I already started that. Each step was like, I didn't have to, but I was recommended to. And it was absolutely no problem for me to take the recommendations. And then I found linguistics. And from there, I learned about pragmatics and syntax, which were just my favorite two topics in the field of how languages work. in understanding universal language laws. I really loved being able to see how sentences are different in different languages, and even dying languages was a passion of mine. And I was like, I never thought about the in between. I just thought it's either you speak it now or it's dead. And then there's thousands of languages that are in the process of dying within the next 5 to 10 years, and they need linguists to study and track down the culture before it dies. And so it was a passion. So not necessary, but also somewhere down the line, it became necessary
Mhm.
because I realized I was interested in them.
Wow, I love that. Love that story. Everything just kind of flowed very smoothly and just wow, just
Yeah.
back to back.
Right? I was like, thank you, God. Like, truly a Christian journey in a way. Anytime someone recommended it, I was just like, okay, absolutely. I'm far away from math now, so
Yeah.
why stop?
And then after college, how did your language learning journey evolve?
Mm, it definitely evolved. I feel like I had a lot of reasons to use languages in my hometown up until I transferred when my high school closed down and I went to a public school. So that one year, my senior year, I was in a different city and many stories in between. Like in elementary school, there was a student that was from Nigeria. And so I wanted to get to know that person so that I could understand that language. In middle school, there was a transfer student. I can't remember from exactly where, but it was a different writing system. And again, it felt like a secret code. So
Hmm.
I wanted to use it for that reason. In high school, I told you about Latin and ancient Greek, but there was a transfer student from Ethiopia in my grade. And so it was awesome to be able to talk with her and understand a new culture. But for the most part, even in college, I learned it academically, or the way that I tried to learn it was like, teach me this, then teach me how to use it like this. And then it was a system. And I studied abroad in Italy during my last year of college. And I went to a university where everyone spoke 3 to 4 languages. And
Wow.
it wasn't that special anymore for me to be out of town. And,
Hmm.
all of my friends were talking to me in English, but then they'll talk to each other in Italian and French, or Italian and Spanish, or Italian and German. And I just felt like there is a bigger world out there. And I thought I was satisfied with what I knew, but I'm not. So when I graduated college, I was like, I have all of this knowledge from linguistics, from being able to understand different parts of language, and being a resident assistant in an international college, I mean, the international dorm, and having people from China, from Japan, from Korea, and being able to talk in a conversation level in Japanese at one point, not now. But
Not anymore.
the way that I approached languages in college was like system. What can I do? What can't I do? And then I graduated and I said, I'm coming to Korea. Everyone was absolutely shocked because barely talked about Korea at that time. And I was just like, great idea. I was torn between Korea and Japan, but Korea's
Okay.
support for new teachers was just a little easier. And yeah, I came to Korea, and the need to use Korean in my classroom was why I had to learn it. So it went from, oh, how do I say banana and apple, to no, how do I control a classroom if my teachers are late or if my co-teachers don't show up, which eventually happened, where I'm in a
Mhm.
classroom with 20 students by myself and I can't speak Korean and they barely understand my English, and it was like pre-teacher English that I was using. So it wasn't as friendly for them. And I had to study right away, hard, and in a way where people had to teach me in person every word I know now. The language system and the vocabulary is not as familiar as Latin or even Greek or even Italian or French or any other language I've learned. It's like the root words I would never be able to guess. So I had to use them in context, or I had to
Okay.
hear it enough for me to feel like, okay, this is the word that must mean student. This is the word that must mean teacher. It's such a different approach.
So you said your classes in Korea were a big reason why you had the desire and why you felt the need to learn Korean, right? What about outside of the classes though? Like, just your living experience in Korea. Did you feel the need to learn Korean in that aspect as well? Just like going
It's
to the store or, things like that,
Yeah. So my very first year in Korea, I remember going to convenience stores a lot for my dinners or for my lunches or even snacks. And I remember my co-teacher showed me how to download the app for delivering food. And I delivered so much food so that I didn't have to go to the grocery stores because the grocery store is the only place where I would say there's no mercy. You could find pasta, you could find milk, like some things look the same. But if it's any type of meat, like the cuts of meat, I couldn't tell you what chicken breast is versus chicken thigh. I couldn't tell you about pork versus beef if they were pre sliced. And so I would have been a vegetarian if I went to the grocery stores. Then the vegetables are different. So, like,
Yep.
they have my cabbage, but then they have different greens altogether. And I tried a couple of times to buy some of the vegetables, and then I would taste it, and I'm like, this is not spinach. I learned that lesson, but I don't know what this is.
Hmm.
So I did have to learn some basic Korean to go outside, but other than the grocery stores, I didn't have to because all of the signs are in Korean and English. A lot of the time I
Wow.
tried to order my food in Korean, but they noticed that I am not Korean and they would try to talk to me in English. So sometimes I felt discouraged to order food in Korean. And I would
Okay.
just say simply, like pointing with the finger and pictures, like 이거 주세요, like this and this, please give me. And they're like, okay, clearly she's not able to talk with me. But many people could spend years here not learning Korean outside of a
Wow.
work situation because it's so English friendly. All of the bus stops, they will say the bus stop in Korean and then English and then sometimes Japanese. And then
Hmm.
all of the stations for trains and stuff, they even print the tickets in Korean and English. You could ask, like, everything is almost kiosk based. So you could choose Korean or English in those cases as well. And even the app for translating, there's one where you could take a picture and it'll scan the text and translate it for you. Very, very English friendly outside of the school. And I feel like if I didn't have a passion for language learning, I could easily be comfortable enough to not study. But
Hmm.
personally, from I love cooking and I need to figure out where is pork and where is
Of
beef.
course.
Between that and my students laughing at me every time my pronunciation is wrong, and just, it's more of an ego thing for why I had to learn Korean as well. There's a
Yep.
fun element, of course. The sad element is my co-teachers sometimes just wouldn't show up, which technically they're supposed to be with me at all times in the classroom because it counts as their teaching hours as well. But everyone has different stories with this, and some teachers treat it as, well, I don't have to lesson plan, so if I don't come, then I just get free, relaxed time. And because my classes are important to plan, and that happens without saying a lot of the drama. But the fun part is my students are the reason why I learn. So I treated it like Korean classes sometimes. So I would make all the worksheets in Korean and English, and they'll laugh at my spelling. And I would go home and I'm like, I'm never messing up the spelling of apple again. Because if I have to judge their writing, they have every right to judge mine. So I leveled the playing field in my classrooms where it's like it's 20 teachers versus one teacher. They're gonna win every time, you know?
Yep.
They taught me the newest words, like combinations we would never use as English speakers. Like when COVID hit, everyone was saying uncle, uncle, uncle. And I was like, uncles? Y'all don't care about uncles. Why are we talking about it? But it means online class, onke. And
Uncle.
right. And so even simple things like that, my students would teach me. Or now, what was it? Sorke or something like Sorke. And oh yes, Sorke, which very recently happened. I was like, teacher, are you Sorku? And I'm like, what does this mean? And it's like
What you
solo
call me?
Chris. Yeah. So solo Christmas. And I'm like, I would have never guessed.
Solo? Solo?
Like solo Christmas. So solo in a way is one way that they say alone. And then Christmas is technically pronounced Christmas. So the k from Christmas is just solo k. So they'll take the first syllable for each of the words to make shorter word. And I'm like, we
Okay.
don't do that. We just do the first letter, but they do the first pronunciation of these things. They even taught me how to think like a Korean, even if I don't know the word. I'm like, first, is this word familiar to me? No. Second, what two phrases can be this word? And if that fails, now I don't know. I'm breaking out a notebook. What is happening? Long answer to your question, but outside of the classroom, my first couple of years here, I didn't have much of a need, to be honest, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would have never imagined that Korea was like that. I did not know. That's really interesting. Do you do you think any other foreigners that live in Korea had that same experience that you did, or they didn't really, feel the need to, learn Korean because there's enough English around?
I feel like that's a strong reason why a lot of people try to find Korean tutors or try to find places where they could meet Korean friends here, because otherwise you have to force yourself to study Korean in Korea. Compared to any other country I've been to, I could safely say like I studied at home and then never got a chance to use it unless I forced other people in a conversation where it's like, I don't understand English. I'm gonna pretend I'm from like, I don't know, South America or something. And a lot of foreigners come here, foreigners, but a lot of international people come here and really struggle with this
Okay.
because it's different from let's exchange. They're too shy to even meet just casually on the bus or just casually in a shopping line. Like that's how I usually make friends, but
Yep.
here doesn't work at all. You compliment their dress and they're like, "Get away from me, strange human. Why are you talking to me?"
I see. Okay, so it wouldn't be as easy as, just going up to some, like a random Korean like on the street and striking up a conversation in Korean. Like it's
Mm-mm.
not that okay, wow.
It's not like that at all. Like even with
Mhm.
dogs or with kids, like perfect example. A couple of weeks ago, there was a kid that was staring at me while I was eating at a restaurant, and I did a small wave and a small bow, and the parents they smiled and waved, but that was about it. They kind of like moved the baby in the opposite direction, and that was kind of the end of that conversation. Whereas normally, if that kind of thing happens, it's like, "Oh, say hi," or like some kind of conversation would start somehow.
Yep,
And it's not exactly like that. And it's not in a bad way. It's just not they're not usually that kind of friendly. They're
I
friendly
see.
in many other ways. Meeting people online is the best way, or finding places where there are language exchanges is another good way. And yeah, it a lot of people struggle with it, I'm sure, or have a similar experience to me if they're teachers.
So what were some of the other methods, or I guess all the methods that you used to learn Korean while you were there, in addition to speaking with your students?
That's a fantastic question, actually, because it builds up to where I am today. When I first came here, I went down the Talk to Me in Korean website, a very useful resource for people who start from level 1 to level 9 according to their system. It
Level
has a
one to
bunch of,
nine.
yeah, they have a bunch of audio lessons and you
Okay.
could follow them even for free, but their paid version is good too. I didn't use the paid version for a while. But just for free, I could listen to their like short lessons for grammar. They give us vocab and we could practice with them. They'll give space for us to make our own sentences and they have the Talk to Me in Korean books. So I went through that. I bought a couple of books to go through the textbook or workbook and then I found how to study Korean. So any grammar question that I had, I searched the grammar and that website always came up and gave a bunch of useful phrases to use and things like that. Over time, I tried to do vocab because I thought I'll take the exam. So I tried to do the vocab, and vocab is the death of me in any
Really?
language. It's the death of me in any language. In linguistics, I avoided morphology. I avoided the word-based classes because memorizing vocabulary is just terrible for me. I could try everything and it would fail. It's also
Okay.
why, especially in Korea, if I didn't hear my students using it, it barely stuck with me. So I almost speak like a student because
Hmm.
I just listen to them. Or my co teachers, I speak like them sometimes. It just depends on the situation. I'm like a parrot. I
Yeah.
follow like that, you know? And so don't know what I'm saying. Just I know it must be right because that's what they said.
It's a good
And
start. It's a very good
it's a good
start.
start, right? Like, that's what A, B, and C said. I got you. And
Hmm.
so, how to study Korean, talk to me in Korean, over time, vocabulary books that never got finished. I would carry a journal with me, like a small booklet, so that every time I heard new words or phrases, I would write them down. I had a lot of co-teacher meetings, or like I was friends with a few people. So I would try to go to a cafe with them, talk with them, and then whenever they spoke some phrases, I wrote them down and I would never rewrite them because, again, phrases, words, how do I use them? No one's giving me the parrot. I can't do the parrot thing on my own. So that was a fail. And I eventually realized I want to have conversations with my co teachers. So I wrote down all of the questions that I want to ask my co teachers, and then I tried to translate those into Korean. And then I would try to say them to my co teachers, and they would give me more natural ways to say them. And then
Excellent.
that was useful for me. So, with that in mind, I made this list of questions grew. And then I was like, you know what? I wonder if I could just create a book for myself. So I made a book with 150 questions. And then my friends, my two closest friends, they were like, I want that book when you finish because what you're doing makes sense. And I made that book in English for people to translate on their own because, like me, I translated it and then I got the natural responses from my coworkers. So that was helpful for me to have enough space to translate the questions as many times as I want or to get multiple ways to translate the same question. So I created that book, and
Wow.
that's the Speak in Spades journal, the very first product I even thought to share with the world. And then people were like, can you translate it for me? And I was like, yes and no. It's been forever since I've used Spanish. And like I said, spelling and vocabulary are the death of me. So I hired people to translate it into Spanish and Portuguese and French. And then over time, I met my boyfriend at some point in the process. He translated it to Korean. I was on Twitter at some point and I found someone. So, one of my closest Japanese friends and his father had a bonding time while translating my book into Japanese. And from there, I say that to say, like, questions really did it for me. Because
Hmm.
personally, I need to use it. And
Yep.
I know my goal is conversations. I don't want to be the shy person that understands everything but can't use anything, you know?
Hmm.
And even my co-teachers, a lot of them were able to have great conversations with me, but then other teachers from different majors would try to talk to me, but also be too shy to ask me anything. They would just kind of come in and be like, I have two daughters and walk away. And I'm like, that's fantastic. I have questions about that, but you ran away, you know, in a cute way. So that was one way that worked. And then over time, I realized one of the ways I teach, or one of the main ways I teach in the school, is every week I make a game. I make a PowerPoint game or I show a card game, but most of the time I make games. And that to help them review what we talk about in the textbook, right? And I'm like, I want to do those things. Like, truly, I want to be a student because I love my lessons and they love my lessons. So we're all having a good time like little kids, and they get to practice their English, but I don't get to practice my Korean. It's so unfair. And so I created a game where I could do that. Like, I want to create a way where I could still review what I'm learning, but also be able to like have fun with it. So one resource is more like measurable, like if you finish the book, you can answer 150 questions. That's fantastic. The other one is like I could keep reusing the same resource and play a bunch of games until I could answer all of the questions on the card. So over time, creating the card. And so that's the birth of the brand that I have now, Speak in Spades. But those are the main two ways that have worked for me for learning Korean. I had to find a way where I couldn't, pardon me, but I couldn't BS it in a way. I couldn't lie through the process. With Spanish, Italian, Latin, like I had the cheat code with Latin, especially. I could get
Yep.
by, with figuring out what the word means by just listening and responding. But Korean, I was exposed. I felt like the A+ student that never had to study, and now Korean comes, and I'm like, I had never studied. Like I have to admit it, I hadn't really studied until Korean. So those were the main things. And even now I'm like, I want to take the exam, but I know I will not be able to do vocab until I find a fun way to learn vocab.
Yep.
So now I'm trying to create a vocabulary puzzle book because I love puzzles, and to be able to do puzzles that use the same words over a spaced period of time, that will probably be a lot more effective than the literal vocabulary book I bought 2 weeks ago and have not opened because it terrifies me. It's like a monster under my
Yep.
bed, but it looks pretty.
So which language skill do you think was the most difficult to develop then, in between reading, writing, listening, and speaking?
More than speaking, I would say listening. There's two reasons why. One, I'm not in the place where they speak standard Korean. I am in Daegu, and this area is a part of a specific accent that's almost like the Southern accent in the US, right?
Okay.
And so I came in with hard mode. My textbooks didn't work, which is another reason why I had to create my own resource. Like, this book
Wow.
says this sentence, but you're not asking me this sentence. What are you saying? I had to do that because Daegu is not, it's built different. It's not meant for beginners. And I came here confident with all my language skills, and it showed me I have nothing. So listening was the hardest because I wasn't familiar with the grammar enough to know that it was different. I just knew that I couldn't answer it, and I couldn't even find the words I knew because their pronunciation is different. It's like if someone says apple really fast, I'm not understanding what you're trying to say. Are you saying, what are you pulling? But instead they're saying apple. And I'm like, I know the word apple. I studied that one, I promise. I teach my kids that like once a year. you
Hmm.
know? So listening is the hardest because if you know what they're saying, you could answer. And then they could understand you. But if you can't understand them, you definitely walk away from a conversation frustrated.
Okay.
The writing and the writing, speaking is all based on, do you understand what is being asked of you? So I feel like for me, reading and listening were harder for me because reading too, the grammar is different based on if you're writing something or if you're speaking something. It's like the way the word looks changes. They have like the right written form of verbs. So
I don't know
even
what
that.
that means. Is that
Exactly.
not the same thing in other languages?
So I feel like for Spanish, if you say, I want an apple, you could literally write like, quiero una manzana, right?
Hmm.
But imagine if you have to add an extra, like, imagine if the verb changed if you're writing it versus if you're speaking it. Like, quiero una manzana. And it's like, what is this N doing? What does this mean? That's kind of what's happening here for Korean, for the written form versus the speaking form, the spoken form. But because I'm in Daegu, they often use the written form when speaking. And it's also like extra, you
Yeah.
know? And it's hard. I hope I explained it well enough, but it's still a harder concept to even like try to express. They have different levels of formality, so not even just, usted versus tú. They have a middle one, which is like casual, but also for strangers. But, then you have the extremely formal, which is for your principal if you're a teacher, or for the president or something, you know?
Mm.
And then you have
More
the one,
complex.
yeah, like they have 4 to 5 different formalities.
Wow, that's too
Yeah.
many.
And so listening and reading for me were the hardest, but if I had to choose between the two, then listening.
And okay, so how long have you been learning Korean for now?
I tried my best to challenge myself that other than the writing system, I wouldn't learn anything until I came to Korea. And
Hmm.
so I came here in 2019, and with the back and forths between the US and here, like I was in the US for about 6 months. So I'll say going on 5 years, but by now people will be like, that's 4.5. I'm like, fine.
Hmm.
But roughly 5 years.
And what did your study schedule, or did you have like a, a study schedule, a language study schedule? Because of course you were teaching English, so I'm sure you're, fairly busy. How did that look for you?
So, what I will say is, especially my first 3 years, my classes were my study schedule. Because, for example, if I'm teaching jobs for a lesson, I had 8 classes that's learning jobs over the course of these 5 days. So, I would, by the time I finished the week, that's how I know how to say astronaut, even though I've never needed to use it. And so,
I see.
so teaching really was my lesson plan. And then I would come home and if I had time, I would study the grammar, like with the talk to me in Korean. So at one point, I would say I had a study plan where I would come home and clean and listen to one lesson. And at that point, I would say I did that 5 times a week. But over time, I realized that's not the way that I learned. I was doing it to do it or to say that I was doing it, but that wasn't what was best for me. Now I'm at a point where I don't study, I don't have a study plan, but I'm using everything around me like every other day or every day to like just build on some skills for speaking and for just improving my flow of sentence building sentences
Yeah.
because maybe you understand but you get to a point where you could use the same grammar and talk about almost anything and it's like I want to say the same thing in more ways but that's hard because the way that you've learned to say it is so efficient.
Hmm.
Why would I add this extra grammar when I literally have been able to order food by just
Yeah.
doing this, you know? Like I don't need to add the sprinkle salt, you know? So I'm currently struggling with my language study plan, partly because of what I'm doing for my business for Speak in Spades, and then partly because I'm just at a place now where I teach little kids twice a week. I used to teach middle school where we could do more complex conversations, but now we're back to teaching apple and orange and I know how to say these things. And there's a different I could point at different times where I had better study plans, but on Sundays I have language exchanges. And so at the time of this interview,
In
it's
Korea.
Sunday. So yeah, I
Oh wow.
created a language exchange. So
Oh
for Daegu,
wow.
so there's people that are Koreans, and then there's a lot of English teachers or international students that they all come and meet. And so that's like a 4 to 5 hour commitment to be in a place where I could use Korean. And then I used to go to 6 to 7 language exchanges last year. So there were some Korean Spanish language exchanges I used to go to. There was one where it was like 5 different languages in one room, and you could just choose
Wow.
which one you want to go to. And others were Korean English, but they have a different way of approaching what to do during that time. One is conversation based, and so you end up using more English, but others are like, here's the task, say this in Korean. And they're strict but useful. Mine is
Hmm.
trying to find a balance between the two. So once a week, I commit to using Korean with adults. Twice a week, I commit to using conversational Korean with my coworkers or my students. And then the rest of the days, I do what I can. I watch variety shows, and I feel like that's study enough for me because, again, I need all the listening practice I could get.
Hmm. Exactly. In your classes, is it very strict as far as what your students can speak? So, for example, can they only speak English when they are speaking with you, when they're asking questions, or can they speak Korean as well?
It's a very good question. At each of the jobs that I've had, it was a different set of rules for the students. For the public school, they could use a mix of Korean and English because the co-teacher that I'm in the classroom with, is there in case they don't understand my lesson, or even just to be able to help them understand the grammar point in a deeper level, because the kids are also learning Korean at the same time they're learning English. And especially for them, they still have to make sense out of what is this grammar point in Korean. And so that's another reason why the co-teacher is there. And I feel like it's helpful for them at such a young age, since this my class is more speaking listening based. And so
Okay.
it's useful in that way. So Korean and English. But there have been private schools, like I work in a private school now, and I've done a couple of part-time private school jobs where they told their students only English. Does it work? No. It
No.
fails really hard. Like
Hmm.
sometimes because it's the rule of only English, it forces them to not speak at all, or it forces them to use English, and then when their friends either laugh or make any kind of face, they get so shy that they just use Korean anyway. And it's very hard for me to pretend that I don't know what they're saying at this stage in my life. So I'm just like, what did you say? And they're like, teacher, you know. And they'll say that in English, and I'm like, I know. It's just let me get paid here. And so the job I'm at now, they let me do it my way. So I tell the students, okay, English time if they're using too much Korean during a game. But in the very beginning, they might say, teacher, what's this word? And I would pull up my phone if I don't know the word and say, let's see. And I give them the phone to show them that level of trust so they could translate it. And then they'll see the word and be like, teacher, I know. And I'm like, I know you know. That's why. So it definitely depends. I prefer having that mix, especially the younger they are, so that this way they can make those connections with their own language too.
How would you learn Korean again if you were living in the United States and you weren't living in Korea? How would you go about that?
I've thought about this a couple of times before. I wondered if it would really help me to learn Korean before coming to Korea, and if so, how would I do it? I would do it through songs or through the interviews that either stars have or K-pop idols have. A lot of K-pop groups have their own like reality show, or they have their own vlogging videos. For
Really?
example, BTS has like almost 1,000 videos of just them vlogging. Like it's a whole like TV channel and everything. And
Wow.
so I feel like it's such an awesome resource if you're going to learn Korean, because it's your people that you listen to talking behind the scenes. You get to know more about how they are, their personalities. And the reason why K-pop groups are good is because they're from different parts of the country. So when you hear them talk, they're talking with different accents right away. And
Okay.
so the middle school that I taught in, for example, is the one that one of the members of BTS graduated from. And so he's from Daegu. So he speaks like a person from Daegu. So it would have been useful if I had known, oh, I'm coming to Daegu. It would have been useful to listen to him, because otherwise it's hard to find. If I try to find Daegu accent Korean lessons, it doesn't exist
They don't
still.
they don't exist.
Like it could, but it's more of like, oh, this is how they say this one word, or this is how they say this one phrase, but it's not like Daegu Korean 101. You're not going to
Wow.
get that easily. You have to know Korean enough to be able to do that. But
They have Korean in or Duolingo has Korean, right? A Korean
mhm,
course.
mhm,
What kind of
mhm.
Korean is that then?
I hated the Korean Duolingo around the time that I use it, and I say that very strongly. I don't take it back. I triple down on it. I hated it.
Yeah.
You could definitely use that as a tagline. I hate it that much. They use the formal with a smile, of course. But no, they use the very, very formal Korean, or they use the very like informal Korean, and they don't give you context at all for when to use it. Now they probably changed it, but at the time it was a struggle, like trying to understand what are these endings, because you can't,
Hmm.
as humans and especially as adults, we're searching for patterns so that we could remember it. And there was none. One day they're telling you this formal one, and then the next second they're like, here, guess what this means. And I'm like, I don't know what this means because you changed the endings. What's happening here? And so it works for romance languages if you have exposure to it, but it does not work if you're like, if I'm thinking before coming to Korea and I did Duolingo, it was a no. And then even for like Pimsleur in a way, I'd used it for Korean 2 years ago. And knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have been able to use any of that in my real life setting. So
Oh, that the Korean that you learned in Pimsleur, you wouldn't be able. Wow.
Mhm. And so, like, not until level 3 or 4.
Okay, I
So
see.
we're talking you're
Yeah.
spending months with this form that
Wow.
it could make sense, but you're just not going to use it. I would come to Korea using that form if I just did Pimsleur 1 or if I just did Pimsleur 2. And then everyone would probably look at me weird, like, why are you speaking so formally to me? And so it would definitely not work. I would rather start right away with videos of people from different parts of the country so you could pick out what is happening right away. And I would still stick with Talk to Me in Korean and how to study Korean because those two will give you the grammar and the vocab basics that you could use to build off of. I think
Okay.
that would be the main way. And if I had to plug for how to use what you're learning, then I would use my journal. That would be the plug because I would want to use what I'm learning. So listening would be the
Yep.
hardest, but then you should also produce, right? And if I
Hmm.
don't have a partner or anyone to study with in the US, then writing my answers might be a start.
And through all of your language learning experience thus far, what is some piece of advice that you would share with new language learners?
My favorite piece of advice is what started my whole brand. Anything around you, anything that you think could be a resource is probably a resource. If you don't have that creative muscle, try to build it. Anything could be a resource. I'm doing a whole series this year with different ways to turn your room or your home into language lessons, even if you don't have a tutor or even if you can't afford one. But if you can, it's great. But you can turn your photos into a resource. Take a photo, try to describe it, and if you can't, now you know what you should work on. If you're in the kitchen cooking, do you know how to say all of your ingredients in your language? You could use your spatula and your pot as characters in a story, which is something I'll talk about soon. Like literally, your pot's probably thinking, it's too hot, or your pot's probably thinking I want to try this, or it's too much salt. Like give everything in your house characters, like looking in the mirror and telling the mirror's telling you you look fine, you're running late, just go. Like
I like
there's so many different ways that everything around you could be used as a resource. And so don't be afraid to be silly. Don't be
that.
afraid to be a kid again, not in the sense of learning from the basics, but just have that joy when you're learning a language. Like my student, you don't have to be in a classroom full of kids to remember to be a kid, is like, I guess, the main thing that I would recommend. You don't have to have structure to learn a language. Helps sometimes, but don't let that be the obstacle.
What would you define as structure?
I would define structure as like thinking that you have to buy all of the textbooks that are recommended by everyone. Like, even if what I'm saying, as far as my book, it just doesn't speak to you, I have no hard feelings because, again, maybe you do like learning vocabulary and that's your favorite way to learn a language, right? So then, again, everything around you is a resource. You don't have to buy a vocabulary book with 500 words in it. Do you know how to say these words first? Like,
Mhm.
do
Okay.
you know how, yeah, so don't be afraid to, I don't want to dissuade anyone from buying books, or I don't want to dissuade anyone from anything because we all have products we're trying to sell, right? But at times, just remember that anything could help, anything's better than nothing.
And on topic of fluency, are you fluent in Korean? And second question is, how do you define fluency in a language?
I see you've done some research. So, as both a linguist, an educator, and also on the other side as a student and a language lover overall, I've done a lot of research on what fluency, like the concept of fluency. and I created a quiz that's like, what's your language goals? And by the end, it's like 7 different types of fluency, from business fluency, travel fluency, conversation fluency, basic or advanced, or you have just output fluency, so like writing and speaking versus input fluency, listening and reading. I feel like fluency is based on what your goal is and can you do it, right? So, perfect example for me is to answer your question, yes, I'm fluent. If I go to a grocery store, I know what I'm buying. I know all of the things I'm getting. If I go to the hospital, I could describe where I'm hurting. I could
Yeah.
go to a taxi driver and have a 30-minute conversation about anything he throws at me if I'm sitting in the taxi. And I could even translate for my friends if they're in need of anything. I'd be a great travel guide. I can figure out new words, and I know the system for figuring out a new word on my phone because I could read it. I could see the examples, you know. If I could do all of these things, then I believe, yes, I'm fluent for my goal, which is communication, conversation fluency, but also in the realm of, can I survive in Korea? Can I live here even without my husband and get by? And I've proven that to myself even before getting married, right? And I think that for me is fluency. I don't need the test to tell me I'm level 4 or level 5. I probably won't pass it because I don't know a lot of vocab. But if you tell me the vocab for what I need, I can make a sentence. I can make a million sentences. And so I could get by. People are like, let's switch to Korean. I don't have that fear. I'm right away like, what do you want me to say? You know? And if I can't say it, I admit it. I'll search the word, but the grammar we don't have to worry about because I've been there. So for people who wonder about fluency, I feel like the goal is, what are your goals and can you do it? And then being able to be honest, like, what can you do and what can't you do? Because I feel like even if I have all 4 of those skills mastered, there's still things that I won't be able to do or as fast or as well, you know,
Mhm.
as English.
Yeah, that's
But if
definitely a new
people,
perspective for me
hmm
on
so
fluency.
yeah, if you want to take the test, I have 2 different personality tests. One is for what kind of language learner you are, and then by the end, you have mixed results. So I hate the ones where it's like, you definitely are this. It's like, no, you get to see what percent of each of them you are. So you could click and
Okay.
see a little bit about, and it's fun because it's like, are you a club, a diamond, a spade, or a heart? And, you know, I made speaking spades and I'm a club, so I'm a fake. But no, other than that, the what's your end goal? It helps you with understanding like, are these my goals? How do I achieve these goals? And then after that, you could try and achieve a new one. I do want to be at exam fluency eventually, but I need to create a plan for that. So just being aware of what fluency you're trying to achieve, and then have you achieved it?
Okay, this question just popped into my head. How long should a language learner study their language every single day?
That is a fantastic question. And again, it goes with fluency. And I also think that if you're able to be consistent in a skill, then you're going to reach a goal faster. If that's not what your time commitment is, if that's not what your lifestyle is at the moment, I would say when you're in a session, at least an hour. For example, when I was doing the videos my first year, or the audios of Talk to Me in Korean, they're somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes. I could easily do that Monday through Friday while I'm cooking or cleaning, right? And so that was an easy goal for me to achieve at the time. Here I am around now in my life. And if I want to do that, to be quite honest, my life is scattered. I'm always doing something. I skip meals, even. I barely clean. And I want to say that I'm better with that. But if anyone turned this camera around right now, they'd be confused what kind of room this is. This is the bedroom, kitchen, living room, and workspace, you
Mhm.
know? And so I don't have that sense of, oh, I could do something every day consistently at this time. That's not me because I am not consistent with my life. I can't pick an exact
Exactly the
time.
same way.
But if I'm commuting, And whenever I do commute, I can make the habit of I'm listening to one Spanish podcast because
Hmm.
these days I'm studying Spanish and Korean because I have
Ooh,
found a lot of Spanish friends ever since last year, and the Spanish Korean language exchanges helped me realize it's definitely
awesome.
possible for me to connect Spanish to Korean now.
Sweet.
So it's been, and even last night I had a party for my friend. It was his birthday. He's from Panama, and so or Panama, and so he had friends that were from Ecuador and Chile, and so to be able to talk with them in Spanish, and then he has friends from a different area of Korea, and they mainly spoke Korean, so to speak to them in Korean, and then the English teachers in English, my brain was so happy last night. And so I feel like do what you can on like however you can for at least an hour if you have an irregular schedule,
Yeah.
or if you're like me and you're just like, look, when I do go outside, which isn't as often these days, at the very least I go to work on Wednesdays and Fridays, and then I go to the language exchange on Sundays. So on Sunday I know I'm going to be tired, I use languages for 4 hours, but these two times, Wednesday and Friday, I'm going to listen to a Spanish podcast. That usually takes between 45 minutes to an hour. And if nothing else, two times a week, I did a Spanish listening podcast because I'm building my listening skills again. So, at the very least, an hour whenever you can, if you're not consistent. If you're consistent, now we're talking 10 to 15 minutes. Eventually, you'll get there. And that's why Duolingo works for a lot of people. That's why Pimsleur could work if it's like a 30 minutes a day kind of situation, because you could be consistent if you pair it with something that's already a part of your life.
Yep.
But it's just not me right now. So I'm all over the place, but strategically, I at least do 2 hours of Spanish and 4 hours of Korean a week.
Excellent. I'm happy that you're still getting in some nice language learning,
Right?
even with a chaotic schedule. So that can be
Chaos.
very challenging.
Is it similar for you too?
Yeah, I'm all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Not just with language learning, but in life. My mind's all over the place. And yeah, schedule. I don't have a schedule. I've never really had a schedule. I've always been very envious of other language learners that are just like, they have like the colored schedule, and it's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this at this time, vocabulary, then like, listening, then speaking, like everything's nice and organized. I've never been like that. For me, it's just like whenever I can, I'm going to do it. I'm going to speak. Like right now, I'm going to think in Spanish. Okay, right now I'm gonna listen to music because I'm going to the gym or whatnot. I'm gonna have a conversation with my friend in Spanish at the gym. But it's not like it's not really organized. It's just whenever I can,
Mm-hmm.
whenever I have the time, whenever I have enough energy to do so.
Right. And that's the other thing. Like some people might be like push through that or figure out a way, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. Our If your language learning can be a part of your lifestyle, I feel like it takes a lot of pressure off. You're more engaged when you're in these sessions because it's what you've chosen to do based on what works for you versus feeling this guilt of like I can't do a schedule. If that's just not how you've been, why would you force yourself to change because of a hobby? Hopefully, it's a hobby. If it's supposed to be something you're forced to do, then you might be afraid or upset with learning the language. But if you don't have to feel that way, why are you forcing yourself to feel that way? My lifestyle, when it was organized, it was because I was feeling good about myself. I figured out a system. I didn't have to do like what I'm doing now, you know? But now my life is chaos and I don't want to hate the languages I'm learning. So I'm gonna make it work with me. They're my friends. Spanish is my friend. Korean is my friend. Or I could even think of it as like, these are my personalities and I don't hate any of my personalities. So why would I do more than what I can do, you know? And I feel
That's a
like
very
you've
good
reached
point.
your goal. You've reached your goal in such a way where it's like it's a part of you and you don't hate it. You're in your car listening to music and you show us music every day because you love music and you figured out to make it a part of your personality. Would you have done that if you had to do 15 minutes every day, even when you're struggling? Like, after a while, my brain would be like, why am I doing this? And then I would take a 5 month break because I got frustrated.
Since you just
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that, Have you ever taken any breaks from Korean? Like any long breaks, like a month or 2 months, anything like that, from not learning it?
Absolutely. In a way, I would even say that I've taken a year break between last year and this year. On the one hand, I'm
Wow.
getting a lot of exposure with the Sunday meetings or in my environment, but have I
In a class too.
actively, yeah, in the classroom too, but have I actively tried to do anything new? Not exactly. But I will admit I have exposure, so that makes me lazy as a learner. However,
Hmm.
2 years ago, I moved back to the US and I was in the US for 6 months. During this time, I had no exposure. And mind you, at that time, I was just coming from the exposure I used to have in my daily life to now I'm just with my family and my work environment doesn't even understand where Korea is, to be quite honest, you know? And
Love it.
so, and so for 6 months, I would definitely say I took a break because I wasn't using it at all. And it was really hard for me because that was the year that we started the language blizzard online. And I'm like struggling. But that's where my exposed I don't know languages came in. And I would ask my husband, I would like every day for the language challenge, I'm like, what is this? Is this correct? And he'd be like, everything's wrong. Here's what you need to say. And it was like, I had backup. I was the cheat. I was a cheater. Like, I learned how to say it. So I did learn some phrases from him, but like me actively studying, it was
Mhm.
like, this is what's in my brain. Is this right? Get feedback. Use feedback for speaking. Is that studying? Yes and no. Depends on who's looking. I'm gonna just be honest. And so language learning is hard when when you don't have the motivation for it. And I've broken up with Spanish for years because I was in Korea and I had no Spanish speaking friends. So for over 5 years, like even in college, I barely used it for like going on what 8, 9 years up until last year. I didn't use Spanish at all because when I moved from my hometown, now that 1 year was just getting used to this new area and no one spoke Spanish to me. In fact, my friends were from Haiti, so they taught me how to speak Creole during that year. Those were my
Sweet.
friends, like lunch table friends. And so they would speak in Creole, and I'm like, y'all don't want to try to get me in this conversation? Like, y'all gonna really make me I'm competitive, so I went home and I took that as a challenge. I was like, "We gonna get this because you got me messed up. I'm sitting in this table not understanding y'all for 40 minutes while eating my pizza." But no. So for like 8 or 9 years, I didn't use Spanish because I didn't have that motivation. Who am I
Yeah.
speaking to? My motivation for
Mhm.
every language is who am I speaking to,
I
you know?
see. Yeah.
And so it's been asleep for a long time. And then since last year, I've been studying Spanish more because I have friends now. And so it really is. I've taken breaks. I've taken a long break from Italian. And if someone gave me a Latin or ancient Greek book, I could read it to you like a good like sleep story, a lullaby. But what are we saying? Give me 5 hours and a laptop because that's how I got through school. You know, I had to go to the school way of learning things. So, absolutely, I've taken breaks, and a lot of them are still on a break. I need to do a clean break from a couple of languages, but they're still back there somewhere.
Mhm. Trying to break out, trying to break out.
Exactly, exactly. How about you? Have you ever taken a break?
From Spanish, no, not really.
Mm-hmm.
Since I've been studying seriously, no. But
Mm-hmm.
prior to studying seriously, yes, a few of
Mm-hmm.
them. French, not really, but I would say more I had periods where I like greatly reduced how much I was like, learning French.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I was like kind of trying to figure out like how to do it. How do I learn French and Spanish? It was like it's very challenging to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's been just a journey in itself.
Yeah. That's interesting though. You're surprising, like even though you might not think you're a consistent person, to be able to say that is something. And so I applaud you because for me, I'm just like, today is Monday. I don't go
Mhm.
outside and no one has to talk to me. And so what they don't know won't hurt them, right?
Okay, I will say I have been thinking about taking a break from French recently. I like really like recently. I just started thinking about it
Mhm.
because before I went to Colombia, I just got back from Colombia. I decided I was gonna reduce the amount that I was gonna study French every single day.
Mhm.
Not like it was like a whole bunch, but like the little that I was doing because I didn't want to get mixed up. Because like if I'm in Colombia, I just want to focus on Spanish, communicating in Spanish. But if I'm
Mhm.
trying to study French while I'm in Colombia, that I'm trying to communicate in Spanish, I know it's going to mix me up too much. Usually, I don't really
Yeah.
care. But there, I'm just, I just want just Spanish. I want to consume a lot of Spanish, get exposure to Spanish, so I can, increase my Spanish skills. And
Mhm.
then since I've been back, that was like like 6 or 7, maybe a few more days than that, maybe like 10 days of very very little French or no French at all. And I'm just like, oh, it's a struggle coming back. And now I'm just like,
Yeah.
don't really want to. It's been hard. Like I haven't used any
Yeah.
apps like that I usually use. I haven't really used Duolingo and Memorize. I'm just like, it's kind of hard. I'm like, I understand what languages are going through now. Like,
Right.
so trying to build that
Exactly.
motivation up. Like, this is difficult.
It's tough. It's really tough. Like,
Feel everybody's
it's just a challenge already.
pain.
Like, it's hard, but I'm proud of you. Power to you because French and Spanish are similar, but then after a while, some parts I just like, ooh, it's a challenge for me. And so that would probably be one of the last languages I go to for like actively studying.
Yep.
Um, I started to learn it again using Newcomer Languages app for like the language world that's like an online thing. And I tried it and I was like, not for French. I would rather go back to Italian. I would rather just do intermediate Spanish. But for French right now, my brain was so confused. I was like, the grammar and then the pronunciation and then it started getting to numbers and I was like, no, I can't do this. I got so stressed. I was like, I'll take a little break. I thought I could do it, but I'm not ready yet. French is a beast for me. I don't know why.
Mhm.
Creole was easier, but then French, I was like, oh no, I can't do this. I don't know why I can't do this.
Okay. Lastly, I really want to make sure we touch on, speaking spades. And kind of my main question is how can language learners, learn with games and cards and such, and why should they?
I will talk about the why, and I will talk about both, but that's an excellent question. And so, for the reason why a lot of international people come to Korea, for example, and they are teaching in these schools for public schools or for private schools, is so that they could get exposure to the language. So, from a native speaker, but most of the time, we are the teachers that create a game or create an opportunity for them to use what they know and get immediate feedback, or for them to use what they know so that we can figure out what are they struggling with or what do we need to move on from, right? So for us, like every week we create games for each of the classes that we have, and so they learn in that way, like they have an environment that's safe. So for us, like games are a safe space to try new things, right? It takes you outside of the real world, but you're also put in a position almost like an escape room where it's like it's not a real situation, but if you were in this situation, how would you escape, right?
Mhm.
People who don't like puzzles, they still might like an escape room because now it's like it's so different from what you usually have to do. If you're in a English speaking country, you don't have to use Spanish in order to reach a goal, right? Being realistic. But now you're in a
Mhm.
game where you're forcing yourself to use Spanish. And if you don't know how to do it, now it frustrates you. Now you're like, I want to be able to do this. And then if you're able to do it, there's this rewarding feeling that you get like, oh, this is a situation I never would have thought I need a language for, but I did it, right? If I'm playing Clue in Spanish, I would probably never say he murdered him with a knife in the club, right? We're never going to say that. But if I somehow know how to say that sentence, now I have the confidence to try new sentences in real life because I know how to do more things. So, for the experience of being in a new environment, taking yourself away from what you usually do and being able to pair your language with experience. So the three main ways that we learn as humans is from experience, from like literally, how we say, like experience is one of the strongest ways to learn anything. If you're learning how to build something by doing it, then your hands being able to use your senses or being able to connect what you're seeing with applying it right away is one of the best ways to ensure that it'll stick for a longer time. The more you do that, the easier it is for you to use it at a faster pace in the future, even without the even without the tools in front of you. You can explain it easily because you've experienced it, right? Like if you watch a video, so if you're watching videos on a Spanish grammar, you can understand it because they're explaining it to you, but then now it's your turn to use it and
Mhm.
it's a little harder. And
Yeah.
so people should play with games, at least give it a try because it's such an easy, accessible way for you to be in an experience where you're using what you know outside of your comfort zone. You're expanding from I completed this textbook to okay, how do I problem solve? How do I critical think? How do I express myself? How do I express my thoughts? How do I get what I want? And it all depends on the game. So the more games you could do this in, now the more skills you're building. Monopoly with finances or building things or exchanging things. Or you're playing a card game where it's quick paced so you have your reflexes even. Like if you're the first person to say something, you get a reward. So it's different aspects of the human experience that you get to test out when you play different games. And so they should definitely try it because I feel like it's just an awesome resource. And kids in many different countries, not just Korea, are using these experiences to regularly test what they know or for them to regularly use what they just learned, right?
Mhm.
So, my classroom, I teach a grammar point, we do the textbook, I tell them close the book, and now they're expecting a game where they could use it without my help, without my guidance. If that's how a classroom works in another part of the world, then what are you doing? You might as well give it a try. And so my playing cards, I really recommend them, not just because I made them and I tried my best to put my heart and soul into them, but especially if you're from America, you could play your favorite card games with one resource. So I
Yep.
like it because you don't have to buy 9 different board games to test out different skills. You could play I Declare War, or you could play Go Fish, or you could play a speed game like Slapjack, or you could play different games like Spades if you know the game of spades, that's a 4 player game, or if you know a game like Liar, where you have to lie in order to get rid of your cards, you know? So that's why I recommend my cards. But even without it, I just highly recommend you try any game and create your own rules. And I made a list of language challenges that you could pair with your own special rule. Like in Uno, anytime you pluck a card, you have to do a language challenge. Now you have a game that you can use to test what you know. I hope that answered.
No, absolutely. It's just
Mhm,
I'm just trying to think through it because it's not something that I've done before, really.
mhm,
Not at least maybe when I was in middle school, maybe. But apart from that, I haven't really used games and things like that to learn Spanish, learn French. So it's really interesting. Definitely to look into that more because
mhm,
that's an entirely different type of method for learning a language. I don't usually hear about, right? So yeah,
mhm.
for me, it's just really really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this upcoming year, I'm also creating a community online where I'm teaching people how to play not just my playing cards, but online games. Clue is an online game, and I mention it a lot because their strategy during COVID was extra impressive. So they also have escape rooms, and it's virtual or as a regular board game experience that you could try. They
Okay.
have an online experience of Clue where it's not just like they have a solo play version where you have to figure out who's the one and picking up resources by doing mini games. So I want to show people how they could do these different games even online by themselves or with a group of people in order to get a language learning experience from anything. And like I said, anything could be a resource. And COVID helped us with getting even more of those resources. So, highly
Fantastic.
recommend. And I invite you to be one of the guests. And I can't wait to share the list of games and the list of dates so you could pick a date, pick a game, and well, let's go.
Sounds good to me.
And so, yeah, definitely give it a try with your friends or even with people who might not be learning the same language as you. The beauty
Hmm.
of it is that they could interpret it for even English if they wanted to
Yeah,
get to know people. And the final point is what do we do when we play a game? We're not 100% focused on the game, right? We also talk about
absolutely.
life. We get distracted.
Hmm.
So
Or
there's
arguing, or
exactly definitely arguing for Uno or
yeah,
anywhere where people are stealing things from me.
absolutely.
So this was great. I really hope you give it a try and then give it a review and let me know. At me and tell me.
So, how can the language learners that are watching this video get in contact with you and learn more about speaking spades?
Fantastic question. They could check out my website, speakinspades.com, or they could find me on Instagram using the same handle, Speak in Spades. I also have a Pinterest for some of the different tongue twisters or just different cute animations if you'd like. But Instagram and my website are the main ways at the moment. And TikTok is coming, YouTube is coming later on in life.
Awesome.
I have a YouTube, but it's dead. I hope to bring it back to life later. I'm hearing you guys, and the card instructions will be videos at some point, but I'm a little shy.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today and having this great conversation and sharing your experiences. Very eye-opening for me and have given me a lot of ideas as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and I really hope that the joy works both ways. I hope you could feel how excited I am to finally talk with you in person. And yeah, I love games, I love languages, and I really hope you give it a try.